Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this inaugural lecture of the series that's been planned by Article 13. We want to welcome each and every one of you. And in welcoming you, I wish to, first of all, on behalf of our team, welcome and recognize former President Donald Ramotar. Thank you, sir, for coming, and we look forward to an engaging discussion today. Brothers and sisters, electoral reform and electoral systems will be what we'll be looking at, and under the able guidance of Mr. Christopher Ram, who's the lead member, founder member of Article 13, as a matter of fact. And on that note, let me welcome Mr. Ram, and we welcome Dr. Desmond Thomas from the ERG. Let me also welcome Brother Norris Witter from the Labour side of Guyana. And let me also welcome all of you to this session here this evening. It would be a pleasure, it would be a learning experience for all of us to hear, to understand, to assimilate, and to share what we're going to discuss here this evening. This program will be streamed live on Facebook and YouTube. And so we are going to hope that our cameraman, Mr. Raj, and team will do their best to capture all of the questions as well. On that note, then, let me say again, welcome to each and every one of you, and let me call to the podium Mr. Christopher Ram for opening remarks.
Thank you, Yogan. Good afternoon, everyone. Let me begin by making an apology for Mr. Vincent Alexander, who had agreed to be part of the panel. Unfortunately, he is out of town, and the necessary technical facilities could not be provided from our end. So it is entirely our responsibility and failure, and I do apologize. This afternoon's talk, electoral reform and electoral systems. For many of us, probably not in this room, we're only accustomed to one kind of electoral system. But others are very familiar with an alternate system. I suspect that, in fact, I've had an indication that is what our former president and the person who is delivering the inaugural lecture by Article 13. Article 13 is hoping that we will get some more traction in our society. I see the press is complaining that civil society is not very active. I don't know if I can make the same criticism this afternoon about the press. But let's not try to blame each other. We really do, I'm enthusiastic indeed to see the turnout here this afternoon. I'm sure there will be a good participation from the audience remotely. The format this afternoon is a formal presentation by former President Donald Ramotar, and this will be followed by two panelists who hopefully will respond to the issues made by President Ramotar and make their own insight. Part of my role this afternoon is as a timekeeper, and I hope as in respect to everybody, because we do want you to be here. Kit, welcome. You know, you've been has seen modern politics. He's lived through the modern era of politics in Guyana, and he's still strong. So welcome him. Former President Donald Ramotar really needs no introduction. Former President is about it, and he will now address us for about 20 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the head table, distinguished friends all. Allow me first of all to thank you for allowing me this opportunity to speak on this very important subject. What I've done today is to more or less look very briefly, or hopefully briefly, at some of the already reforms that we've had in our constitution, because I know that fundamentally this group is concerned with constitutional reform, and electoral reform is part of that constitutional reform. And then I will go in more mainly, not to compare necessarily the systems, but to speak of what I think is wrong with the system of proportional representation. Throughout our recent history, of our political history, issues of constitutional reforms have featured prominently. Over many years, we have had setbacks and advances in this regard. This debate began taking on a more and more significance since the PNC in the 1970s announced that it was abandoning the independence constitution and adopting a new constitution. That led to a referendum in 1978, and later the birthing of the new constitution in 1980, known as the Socialist Constitution. However, since 1992, this issue has acquired some level of prominence. It is noticeable too that the outcry for constitutional change and reforms becomes much more audible whenever the DPP civic wins an election. Then the old cry is heard that the PDP likes the Bonham's constitution, implying that this country is still being managed by the 1980 constitution. That is most misleading, to say the least. For this reason, I would like to seek your indulgence to speak a little bit of the constitutional advances we have made since 1992. Indeed, I would make bold to say that we have a new constitution, and it is nothing resembling the 1980 constitution. The reason that we did not use the term new constitution, as far as my memory goes, after the work of the 1997-2001 changes of the outcome of the Manson Accord, was the fact that even though we had total consensus to change the name of our country to the Republic of Guyana, because we are the cooperative republic without any cooperatives, it was not done because that would have entailed a referendum, which itself would have been a very costly exercise and maybe not needed to spend a lot of money on something like that. The changes that occurred between 1997 and 2001 were done in a most inclusive way, not only involving the political parties and non-governmental organizations, but it was done with the participation of the whole country. Multi-million dollars were spent in moving the Constitutional Reform Commission throughout Guyana to every nook and cranny. Another very important feature was the composition of the commission, which was truly representative of Guyana. The chairman was Mr. Ralph Ramkaran, senior counsel. The secretary and head of the secretariat was Mr. Hassan Paris, a man who held senior positions in earlier PNC government and a former deputy prime minister. Many NGOs and citizens of outstanding in the society were also involved, including, if I may say, the late Miles Fitzpatrick, among others. I remember him very clearly because I gave a presentation to that committee, and he was one of the people who questioned me the most. Some 200 changes were made to the 1980 Constitution. Significant as that is, even more important was the nature of those changes. All the changes that were made sought to transfer power from the executive branch of government to the legislative branch of government. Those of you who are old enough would remember that one of the features of the 1980 Constitution that was almost universally condemned was the fact that the president could not have been impeached, nor could there have been a no confidence motion in the National Assembly, because the president had the power to prorogue the parliament, dissolve the parliament, before any such debate could have taken place. And that, by the way, let me say, because a lot of people just overtly condemn the 1980 Constitution. I don't think the 1980 Constitution was a bad constitution, but I think that provision was a bad provision in the Constitution because of the fact that you couldn't remain it. But there were a lot of good features of the 1980 Constitution. That gave the president executive immunity from being removed. Many said that made Bonham a dictator. Again, I disagreed with that. I think my friend Ogensai is here, and the WP was one of the people who were plugging that line. And that is not true. Bonham became a dictator under the Independence Constitution, and this was only formalizing things. As is known, the presidents have immunity from prosecution, and that is necessary for presidents to have when they are carrying out their duties as president. The 1980 Constitution had extended that provision to presidents who were out of office when they came out of office. All of that has been changed in the process that has taken place. I'm sorry it has been changed now for me. The appointment of service commissions is now done by the National Assembly and not by the president, thereby ensuring the participation of the opposition in that august body. One of the commissions that is in the news today, the Police Service Commission, is a good example of this. All the names are sent to the president for appointment by the legislative branch of the government, and the chairman is appointed by the president after consultation with the leader of the opposition. That never happened before. The president used to appoint everybody. Judges are also appointed by another consensus process. Names go to the president from the Judicial Service Commission, and the president appoints. I think he can send back, if he has objections, he can send back the name one time, but if they send it back to him, then he's bound to appoint them as judges. Coming back to the National Assembly, new standing committees have been established with powers to summon senior government officers, including ministers, so that their work could be properly interrogated. Another feature that these committees have, which I don't know any other parliament has, not only in the Caribbean and the Commonwealth, but in the world, where there is a rotating chairmanship of those committees. And I was part of those discussions, so I can tell you some of the rationale and the thinking behind that. We did not want people to feel that we were giving the opposition only commissions to chair that were not important. So every year, we rotate between government and opposition the chairmanship of those standing commissions. And I can testify, I myself worked in those commissions, many of those commissions, when I was a member of parliament, and I can testify to the usefulness of those bodies. Moreover, the constitutional changes at the beginning of the century brought into being new rights commissions that played some important role, and I believe I can play an even greater role in the future. These never existed before. These commissions were the Ethnic Relations Commission. This was a very important commission. Because when the PPP got in office in 1992, that was one of the first things we wanted to do, to take ethnic relations from being politicized too much and putting it in a way where people with genuine concerns could go and make their complaints. That is why Dr. Jagan signed the optional protocol of the United Nations to give any political party or persons the opportunity, if they feel they were being discriminated in any way, racial or otherwise, that they could go to the United Nations and complain, and we had the obligation of allowing the UN to come here to do that. And I must say, despite all the charges of racism, not a single case was taken. That opportunity no longer exists, because I think we had to withdraw from that because of one stage, because they wanted us to remove the hanging, what's the right technical term?
Capital punishment.
Huh? Capital punishment, which I disagree with. I think we should get rid of that. That is totally inhuman. And then we had the Women and Gender Commissions, the Indigenous Peoples Commission. These bodies have real power to summon officials and investigate matters brought to them. Added to this is the Human Rights Commission. This body is composed of heads of other commissions plus a chairperson. The chairperson to be appointed by a similar process as we appoint the chair for the Elections Commission. Unfortunately, the Human Rights Commission was never appointed because a list was never sent to the president, either by Desmond Hoyt, Robert Corbyn, or David Granger when they were leader of the opposition. And when Granger became president, he never invited the leader of the opposition to send a list to have any such appointment taking place. I have my own theory about why the PNC did not want to cooperate in seeing these bodies functioning optimally, and I will express them maybe later. A lot of the changes were agreed to or made by the PPP civic administration to promote power sharing. For instance, the process of appointing the Chancellor and the Chief Justice was changed from the President appointing these persons in consultation with the leader of the opposition to having the leader of the opposition agree. That was what these constitutional changes went on. And I remember some of the debates there, although I was not a member of the commission, but part of it was to promote this question of shared governance. So profound were the changes that 2 months ago or so, the president of the Caribbean Court of Justice was here. I think he was addressing the Bar Association. And he said that the constitution that we have is the most progressive in the whole Caribbean. Despite all of the changes, despite all of these advances and changes, we still hear calls for constitutional reforms and constitutional changes. In my view, the weakness of many of the calls for more constitutional reforms and even more constitutional changes lies in the motivation behind these calls. Most of these recent demands, in effect, want to pass power or some power into the hands of those who don't want to face the electorate and those who lose elections. Therefore, in my view, they will be trying to sidestep the decision of the electorate. And that is what I think is the real problem that we face in our main problem, I think, that we have, even though we have been independent for 56 years, we have failed to evolve a strictly Guyanese distinctiveness. We have gone some way, but we have not reached that stage, I believe. We still see ourselves firstly by our racial origins and then as Guyanese. That is why we use so regular the prefix before before we call ourselves Guyanese, Afro-Guyanese or Indo-Guyanese. We have not even been able to overcome that part of our history. from the 1950s, when racial propaganda was extremely intense and used as a tool, as a weapon to derail our national movement and led to racial clashes in the 1960s. I believe that there is a consensus in this society that those divisions were engineered, as I mentioned above, and disrupted the integration process, which had gone a far way by the 1950s and 1960s, and which was even destroyed forcibly in the streets of Georgetown and then in most of our coastal areas and in the upper Demerara area. The events of the 1950s and 1960s were deliberate to create racial divisions in this society, in this country, so that control of our socio-economic and political life could be easily manipulated from abroad. That has left us with a huge racial problem that is still to be overcome in this country. In passing, let me just mention that one of the problems with many of the proposals of the Constitution is rooted in the belief that the racial problems will never be resolved. Therefore, we should mechanically divide power along racial lines. That is to me clearly what I see in some of the proposals that I see. And these are people who make these proposals consciously or unconsciously do not believe that our racial problems could be solved. This would be a disaster of huge proportions if we succumb to something like that. It is important that we do not underplay nor exaggerate the racial problems in this country and try as much as we can to see it objectively as it really exists. In my view, the racial issue does not have real foundations in Guyana. It is not rooted in economics. If you look at racial problems throughout the world, South Africa, it was blacks and non-whites discriminated against because at their expense for white people to live good. That was the same thing in segregation in the United States. And any other society with some of these problems, they have that there. That is not the case in Guyana. And that is why I'm saying it is not impossible, therefore, to overcome it. It is not rooted in economics. In Guyana's case, it is purely subjective, created at a certain period to defeat the movement for genuine independence in this country. However, it has been existing for so long that it has taken on the appearance of some prominence. It has become entrenched in some ways. Imagine even black pudding is racialized now in our country. This, I think, is widely recognized, and many persons from all walks of life have been calling for healing. That is good. I remember I was just telling Lawrence when I met him at the gate. I read 2 weeks ago, I think, he was reviewing the whole page, and he was moralizing and calling for everybody to live good, hug up and kiss up. But I don't think that will work, generally. It's good. That is good, but clearly just making appeals on moral grounds are not enough. What is needed is to undo the mechanism that has established and to give us the racial problem that we have. That mechanism lies in the electoral system, the system of proportional representation. Recall that when PR was imposed on this country, Guyana became the only country in the whole Commonwealth where the system was employed. This does not mean that it was not raised before. It was. There was a debate in the UK for many, many years on this question for a long time. In fact, when the British imposed PR on this country, the Liberal Party in England made a statement condemning them, saying how long we have been calling for PR and you're not giving us PR, but you want to impose it on British Guyana. However, it was always rejected, not because it would give advantages to one or the other party, but because it is believed that it leads to weak governance, that it leads to political instability, and it encourages organization of people along narrow partisan lines and detrimental to the encouragement of organization on national issues and promoting making national questions the most important ones. That is why Britain has rejected it and continues to reject it to this day, because they feel that it leads to fragmentation. Those of you who are old enough would recall that when Trinidad and Tobago was going towards independence in 1962, the proposals for changing the electoral system was made. PR was made in Trinidad. It was rejected by the British themselves. That is a couple of years before we became independent. They rejected PR for Trinidad and Tobago, and Dr. Eric Williams also rejected it. Dr. Williams rejected it on the grounds that was his words, that it will balkanize Trinidad and Tobago. The PNN in 1962 and even much later could have easily won a PR elections. So it was not the case that Dr. Williams was afraid of losing elections. He rejected it from the more nationalist position that it would promote divisions in the society. It was an impediment to national unity as far as he was concerned. The British rejected it for the same reason that it would burden Trinidad with problems. Indeed, at the time when PR was imposed on British Guyana, the Trinidad Parliament was about to debate the imposition of PR on Guyana and would have urged that it be rejected. Dr. Williams was urging that Guyana adopt a similar constitution that Trinidad and Tobago had. The debate was interrupted in the Parliament because of the assassination of John Kennedy on November 23rd, 1963, and they never got back to the subject. However, Williams was advocating a constitution of an independent Guyana similar to that of Trinidad and Tobago. He was opposed to PR for Guyana for the same reason that he opposed it for the country, and he don't think it was a good thing for the Caribbean. The other independent Caribbean country in that period was Jamaica. Its Prime Minister was Sir Alexander Bustamante, who led the Jamaican, founded and led the Jamaican Labour Party, and who ideologically was opposed to the PDP. He also rejected the imposition of PR in British Guyana for the same reason, that it would balkanize the country and it would damage the relations with the Caribbean. He saw it as a tool to destroy good race relations in PG, or by then to make it difficult to repair some of the problems that had already started to occur. He felt so strong on the issue that he refused to send a delegation to observe the 1964 elections in British Guyana. Both those Caribbean leaders saw it from a wider lens. They were convinced that it was not good for Guyana and it was not good for the Caribbean. They understood that problems in one Caribbean state would have an impact on the rest of the region. Even conservative newspapers in the United Kingdom were opposed to PR because of the danger it posed. The Financial Times of London, in October 7, 1964, days before the imposition of PR, was opposed to this. In an editorial, they wrote that it was not the best way for British Guyana because it would encourage formation of splinter groups. Allow me a brief look at PR in Guyana, how it emerged. It was first mooted in 1957, and interestingly by whom? Who was the first person that raised the question of PR in our country. Very interestingly, the idea came from a nominated member of the Legislative Council who was also a very senior executive of Booker's, Mr. Anthony Tasker. Tasker later became head of Booker in British Guyana. And you remember that time, British Guyana sometimes used to be referred to derogatorily as Booker's Guyana because of the weight that sugar had in our economy. At that time, none of the political parties believed in it. As we saw, neither did the British, and I dare say that they are still of the same opinion because the United Kingdom doesn't have it as yet. First past the post was the system that they insisted on. Importantly, Forbes Burnham did not show any interest in PR at that time. Tasker, however, had an inside track to Burnham and the PNC. Recall that Dr. Tom Reed, then an executive member of the PNC, who later became its General Secretary and later became Deputy Prime Minister and Vice President, had a very senior position in Booker's, working under Mr. Tasker. And the first chairperson of the PNC, Mrs. Winifred Gaskin, also worked under Anthony Tasker. Tasker, however, had this inside track. Another leading member of the PNC, despite the great access that he had, up to 1961, Burnham did not agree with the system of proportional representation. Maybe for similar reasons that I mentioned earlier. Maybe he knew, because every time you talk about Burnham, everybody see how brilliant he was, more brilliant than any light bulb. So obviously he might have accepted the dangers of the PR system. I say this because he did not raise this as an issue at the 1960 independence talks in London, nor did he raise it in the elections campaign in 1961. So Mr. Burnham is on record actually as saying that British Guyana would be independent by 1962, meaning that when the election, whatever happened in the election in 1961, that would be going towards independence. The position changed after those elections. What also changed was the total involvement of the United States to remove the TPP. You will recall, I had written an article replying to this man, Ramharak, and where I pointed out that the British had reached the stage, the British who started the anti-communist campaign against the TPP, had reached a stage where they were saying that the PPP was not communist and that they were mistaking nationalism for communism, and they should not try to overthrow Jagan, but the Americans didn't want to hear that. It was then that the demand for PR took center stage. It was here too that Burnham and the PNC embraced proportional representation. During the riots of 1962, I was a boy. I was going to school at the St. Andrews School opposite the Parliament building, where the riots used to be starting from, because Jagan's office was there, and opposite there was the park house. There was a ministerial building with several ministers were out, and the problems always used to start from there, and we used to the school had to open to send us home early. So I know some of these things not only from research. During the 1962, one of the slogans of the PNC, UF, and TUC was PR or CR. CR meaning Patras, not PR, CR. When the British imposed PR on British Guyana, there were two objectives. One is well known and widely accepted. That was to remove the PPP from office. The narrative being that it was a Cold War, because we always excuse everything on the Cold War. Without totally rejecting this view, I think that it was mainly because Dr. Chelly Jagan's uncompromising position on the issue of sovereignty. He would never have agreed for Guyana to be a neo-colonial state. The second reason was never really stated, nor is it written anywhere. And that reason was to ensure that Guyana should always have weak governments, fundamentally coalition governments. This was mainly to ensure that they, now mainly the USA, not so much the British, would be able to control developments easily from abroad. They were very well aware of some of the tendencies of Fox Borum, and they hoped to be able to contain him by making him dependent on the all right. I don't think people know it yet.
We have all this.
All right. They were hoping to contain him by having him depending on smaller political parties. The whole idea was to ensure what had started in the 1960s, the division between mainly Africans and Indians. The whole idea was to ensure that this should be a permanent separation of our peoples, particularly between the two major race groups, Africans and Indians. That move was premised on the experience of other countries which had PR systems. It leads to unstable political situations and fragmentation in society. It even encourages organizations of society based on these differences. Political scientists believe that the rise of Hitler in Germany was due, and the campaign, the anti-Jewish, anti-Gypsy, and anti-communist campaign, which was used to build extreme German nationalism, which led to World War II, was partly due or largely due to the proportional representation system that Germany had up to the end of the last war. Another example that brings out the fragmentation which PR leads to is the situation that existed in Italy after the Second World War, which led to great instability. Between 1964 and 1993, a period of 29 years, Italy had 52 governments, more governments than years, almost 2 per year. It is in that period too that we saw the emergence of the extreme right wing and left wing terrorist groups in Italy, the Red Brigade and others. It is, if we examine a long period, 1964 to 2016, a period of 72 years, Italy had 65 governments. Obviously, governments hardly had time to consider economic and social issues. They were fighting elections all the time. Although Italy had sports of high economic growth, its per capita income is still very way below that of France, UK, and Germany. Compare that to the United Kingdom. For the same period, 64 to 2016, Britain had 25 governments, and Germany, which abandoned the PR system, had 24 governments in that period. It is opposite to note that in that period of political instability for Germany, it grew to become the most developed country in Europe, and the UK is probably number 2 as far as the economy is concerned. Today, the weakness of the system of proportional representation is on display in Israel. Over the last 2 years, Israel had 4 elections, and they are about to have a 5th. Coming back to Guyana, in the case of Israel's political instability created by the situation that we have, it is also leading to constant wars in the Middle East. Just notice how many military attacks Israel carry out on Palestinians and other neighboring countries in the Middle East whenever they go into elections, because it is used as a tool to mobilize extremist Jewish nationalism. However, coming back to Guyana, we were spared so far from having weak governments. This was mainly due to the fact that rigged elections served as a discouragement to the formation of other political parties. So there's some little good in everybody. However, since the return of free and fair elections in 1992, we are witnessing the proliferation of political parties. We have moved from 3 parties contesting the elections in 1961, the last election we had under the forced past the post system, to 7 contesting the forced PR elections in 1964, to 13 parties registered at this last election, 11 of which were qualified to contest the elections. This, I predict, will grow in the future if we continue with this system. Another danger that presents itself to us is the issue of sovereignty, which the PR system, in my view, can compromise our sovereignty at this time. We are now an oil-producing country. We are attracting multi-million national corporations into this country, some which have revenues greater than several Caribbean countries combined, several Caribbean GDP combined. Those corporations will obviously have an interest in our politics and will want to influence events to better maximize their own profit. I submit that the system of proportional representation can offer them an easier opportunity to achieve this than the system of forced past the post. This is an issue because if you look at our country, you need what, 5,000 voters. How much is that to be able to, some of them can finance some of these things? This is an issue that will face us in the not too distant future. To sum up, let me say that one of the reasons why I think the system needs to be changed, as I mentioned, just to emphasize, it encourages organization on the basis of race, religion, and other narrow sectoral interests. The forced past the post system, the experience all over the world, shows that it encourages political parties to contest on national issues. And that is what I was trying to tell my friend Lawrence just now. If the PNC can click their fingers and get a whole set of people coming out on the street to beat and create political instability in the country, they will not give that up voluntarily. They will not give that up voluntarily, and therefore the system of PR, because it helps them to organize on the basis of ethnicity, gives them that power to look at what happened, something sometimes totally disconnected with politics, as what happened recently on the East Coast, or what happened in 2020 with the murder of those 2 young men on the West Bobbies. So I believe because they are encouraged to organize in this way. I mean, look at some of the talk show hosts. Look at some of what they write in the paper. Like I said, even black women, they are politicizing that an Indian woman should not be making 7 black women. This, to my mind, is the most important factor that we need to fight the racism that has remained a bugbear to the development in this society. Moral persuasion, while good, has failed to accomplish this and will continue to fail. It will continue to play a good role, but it will not achieve it. We have to force political parties, the PNC in particular, in my mind, you might not agree with me, but to adopt more national positions We have to force them in this direction. They have no incentives now to go in that way. In conclusion, let me say that I believe that changing our electoral system back to the first past repose can create conditions for dealing with our matter in a greater way and to tackle the bugbear. Give us an opportunity. I'm not saying it's a panacea, but it gives us an opportunity to be able to deal with this issue more profoundly. And I will say, if you agree with me, that PR was instituted in this country to keep our people divided, to create weak governments. And it was done by the colonial powers or whoever you want to call it. But by God, we are independent for 56 years. And I think that we should try to correct the wrong. Thank you for your attention.
I will now ask Mr. Desmond Thomas, who is an economist by profession. More recently, he has taken an interest in electoral systems, and he's going to be speaking to us for about 7 minutes.
You take away some of my time. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me first of all say what a great honor it is, a privilege to me to be part of this panel, this esteemed panel. Happy to be here with an ex-president, and it's a real honor for me. Happy to be here as well with Mr. Witter, who is a labor leader in this country. I also want to applaud Article 30 for recognizing the importance of electoral reform and making electoral reform your first topic in your series. And I hope that this is the beginning of a successful and a very impactful series. Our nation, some of what the ex-president just mentioned, our nation was conceived in turmoil, in conflict, in the middle of the 1960s, 50s and 60s. We were conceived in conflict. And the trouble that we have is that we have not overcome, we have not addressed, we have not solved that conflict to this day, 56 years later. In a way, we are living in a kind of anachronism of, it's 2022, but we're still reliving 1960, 1961, 1964. And this is what we have to address. This is what we have to address. This country is now poised to achieve phenomenal rates of growth, produce untold wealth. But if we don't get our act together, we will not bear the fruits of that wealth. And some people will go get rich, a few will get rich, but the ambition of this country to raise the level of living of the average person is not going to be achieved. And I think people need to realize that development doesn't depend on gold and silver and oil. It depends on people and on vision. And if we don't get those things right, we are not going anywhere. And the Electoral Reform Group, of which I'm a member, I'm happy to see that being joined by some of my colleagues. We believe that there are lots of institutional changes that this country needs. The country needs a lot of institutional changes. We believe that electoral reform is the place to start. And there are lots of reasons that show that this makes sense. The political literature tells you that if you have an unstable political environment, the place to start is usually with electoral reform. Now, there have been many calls for electoral reform over the years. I don't want to dwell on that. That will take us forever. I assume that you're here because you agree to a certain extent that electoral reform is needed. I have actually written a book on the subject. I think it's recommended reading, and you'll find a lot of what of the arguments in favor of electoral reform. But I don't think I have to give you the arguments. We've heard them for decades. People have advocated, observer groups, local groups have advocated there is a need for electoral reform. I would agree with Mr. Ramotar, that Vice President, ex-President Ramotar, that changes have happened over the years, improvements have happened. But I hope that that is not an argument to say that we don't need to change it. We have reached nirvana, we don't need to change. That's not true. You need continuous change. Reform is something that must happen all the time. It's not, something you do and you get to a point and you stop. Reform must be permanent. I want to mention two specific things. We could go on for the next 2 days talking about electoral reform, and I know you don't have that kind of time. But I'll mention two things that show we have a dysfunctional, there are problems with our electoral conditions. Even though there have been changes, there are problems. And one of them, I was thinking about the absurdity recently of when the new leader of the opposition was waiting to get into parliament. I don't know the details, but I get the impression he couldn't go into parliament until somebody else gave the go-ahead, made the changes necessary for the leader of the opposition to get into parliament as a member of parliament. And who is this other person? Somebody who's virtually faded from the whole political scene, but just happens to be what they're called in the legislation referred to as the representative of the list. The representative of the list. To my mind, it just shows the absurdity of the situation. And of course, we have a representative of the list on the other side as well. The point about it is that we have an electoral system, a political system that is under in the stranglehold of a few people. I agree with ex-President Ramotar that a government must be able to govern. A government must be able to govern. But that doesn't mean that the government must have the kind of total control that seems to be the case now. And the problem is that this affection between the people who run the country and the people who are being governed. And that is what needs to be addressed. The other thing I mentioned that is an obvious change of need has to do with the structure of GCOM. Now, I was trying to remember, I was writing this, trying to remember the last time that I could think of something that GCOM did that was positive and constructive. I was thinking, and I found myself thinking for a long time and couldn't come up with anything. The fact of the matter is that GCOM is just there with two sides fighting each other. It has nothing to do with the job that they're there to do. And why is that? There's some basic elements in any elections commission. One of them is that anywhere in the world, there's an effort to make the elections commission non-partisan. You cannot have the elections commission being run by people who are involved in this. And so what happens in most places is that the elections commission, there's an effort to make the elections commission independent, autonomous. And part of the way that is done is by making sure that the members of the commission are appointed in some kind of non-partisan way, one, and also protecting them when they become members, protecting them from political influence. And one way that's done is, for example, they get fixed terms. If you're elected on the Electoral Commission, you're there for 6 years or 8 years or what, there's no renewal. So it's not as if you could be allowing yourself to be influenced because you're thinking you want to make it to the next, a second term. You get a fixed term, and then you are protected from political interest. I think, for example, in the case of India, the Elections Commission of India is three commissioners for 700 million voters. And they get involved in federal elections, local elections, regional elections, 3 people. They're appointed by the president, not the prime minister. And mind you, in India, the president is non-executive. The president is like what we had when we had Arthur Trump, right? So they're appointed by the president for 6 years, and they can only be removed by parliamentary impeachment. So that is the kind of thing you need to protect, so that these people have the stature, they know the job they have to do, and they go about doing it. I could closer home, we look at Jamaica. In Jamaica, there are 9 people, 4 elected are nominated by the parties, 4 non-partisans, and the CEO. And who elects the chairman? The 9. So you don't have this problem that we have here of we get deadlocked by the effort to elect the chairman. That took how many months and years the other day. So no, I'm making these points not to say we need to copy any of these. But all I want to say is we have solutions. There are solutions. Guyanese people just need to sit down and figure them out and just make them. So I think it is clear we have problems in our electoral system, and all the problems have to do with the fact that we need an election system a political system that solves problems. We need a system so that the political system provides the right signals from the population to the political elite to make the changes that are necessary. And that kind of thing is missing in Guyana. And that calls for more representativeness, accountability, more accountability between the people who are elected and the people they serve. And we do need room for more accommodation. There's no accommodation, there's no negotiation within the political system in Guyana. And you don't have to look far. Look at Suriname. Where Suriname, I know there is the issue of coalitions and so on. But coalitions can be a strength. You know, coalitions don't happen just in Germany and Italy. Coalitions happen in a lot of places. And the fact of the matter is that we need, in this country, we need more accommodation, because outside of the political environment, we get along. We have a high level of congeniality among our people in this country. The problem is the political system. Now, I just, I have a set of points, but I wanted to just touch a few things to do with, I will run out of one. I said we could be here for days. Yeah, okay. But first of all, on the issue of the system, I think it's important. Ex-President Ramotar spoke about first past the post as if it's the alternative to PR. The fact of the matter is there are many alternatives. And we need to be able to look at the different, there are significant alternatives. Second point about that is that first past the post is the most popular system in the British Commonwealth, but it's not the most popular system in the world. The most popular system in the world is PR. And I have the figures to point that out in this book. It's worth your getting a copy. The point about it is that PR has strength. First past the post has strength. And what we think is important is we need to sit down and work through them. Okay? And you can have a system with both. You can mix them. There are many alternatives. If you have PR in region 1 where you just have one seat, PR does not work with one seat. So there are lots of things that we need to fix, but we cannot take a position that this one or the other. What works for Trinidad or Jamaica does not necessarily work again. I have a video that I'd be happy to share in which I do an analysis of the 1961 election, just to make the point about the systemic issues related to the first past the post in the PR. I'll just run through a few quick points and then I'll finish. First of all, everything I say, the emphasis is on the system. There are lots of people in this country who seem to think that we have bad politicians, we just need to change them. They just, that is not the answer. Our politicians are no worse, no more corrupt than anybody else in the world. But we have systems, we have to fix the systems. It's not a search for the righteous. Politics is not about the righteous. It's about, because power corrupts. The important thing is to make sure that our politicians are compelled to do the right thing. And that we believe that we can get there. We have to have the dialogue to get there. The important thing, though, is that civil society must be involved in the discussion. It's not just a matter. A lot of people think, why don't PDP and PNC sit down? No, that's not going to work. It's not going to happen. It's not going to work. Electoral reform has to involve others at the table equally. Quickly, electoral reform is not about giving advantage to any particular party. Electoral reform is to just fix the system and change the behaviors of the population as well as the politicians. Electoral reform is not power sharing. A lot of people seem to think they're the same thing. They're not. They can be power sharing in an electoral reform, but they're not the same. So far, I've said nothing about race. And most of the times, people think that our problem is all about race. I think we have historic ethnic insecurities and ethnic problems. We have to address them. But the fact of the matter is, first of all, we take the position that we're starting from a position of continual relations, so that we have a basis to move forward to actually do something. The one thing we have not done since 1960, whatever, is we just have not sat down and talked to each other. Have not sat down and tried to fix the problems. Just winding up quickly. So racial problems. We don't have ethnic majority. There's a country of ethnic minorities, and therefore, I understand the idea of therefore coalitions and a little bit of instability and so on. But you have to think of what you're giving up to what you're getting, and we need the accommodation, the politics of accommodation that comes with that. One thing that is very strange is the deep polarization that we have, even with the system that we have. This system is not conducive to political polarization, yet we have it. In 2015, more than 99.5% of the votes went either PDP or APU. That is really, really weird. So why is it that third parties always do absolutely nothing in a system like that? These are some of the questions we have to address. We have to ask ourselves some of these things. So finally, All that I've said, there are criticisms of the system. I beg to disagree, differ on the point of proportionality. This proportionality is good for Guyana. We can talk about it, we can work through the case. But first past the post, plurality is a disaster for Guyana. And it was just creating more instability. And therefore, because we should not be afraid to have a system that forces us to talk to each other, a system that forces us to accommodate and to work through each other. Finally, we should not be afraid of reform. Reform is good and permanent, should be happening all the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Desmond. I now ask Mr. Norris Witter, prominent and veteran trade union leader, to make his comments, and I'm going to appeal to him because I do want you from the floor to have an opportunity to raise your question. Thanks, Norris.
Thank you very much, former President, former trade union leader, and Dr. Desmond Thomas. Our sisters, brother. I have no fear. I will not even take up the time that people have time. Because I'm the tail ender. You're the tail end of battles and that way, It is not my desire this afternoon to suggest to you what ought to be the electoral system or what constitutional reform measures need to be worked on. What I hope to do is to bring to you my own experience and what my observation has been based on my readings and my analysis. Now, and I think that if we are to address some of the real challenges that face us, we need to be honest, we need to be pragmatic, and we need to look at each other squarely in the eyes and speak to the issues that affect us. In my mind, there's this argument that there is not a racial ethnic problem. But yet there has been a lot of intellectual argument on the question of what has been not only creating the polarization, but very often the deep differences and chasm between the two major racial ethnic groups in Guyana, whether you want to call them the Afro-Guyanese or Indo-Guyanese. The reality, however, is this, is that these two major parties base are for either one or the other ethnic groups. PDP, largely Indo-Guyanese, PNC, largely Afro. It is natural, therefore, that if any of these groups were to win an election at any point in time, that they will see it as their duty to reward those who would have voted for them in order to perpetuate themselves in office. How is the group going to do it? It is the group that largely voted for them. So if you reward one, then you are naturally penalizing another. That's the reality. Now, I recall that when Dr. Kelly Jagan assumed office in 1990, one of the first things he did, and I think that Dr. Jagan in all his wisdom recognized that he was assuming office at a very difficult and challenging time. And that it was beyond the nation's capacity to treat with the challenges before it without export advice and assistance. So what he did, he approached the United States. I would like you to help us to devise a national development strategy. Well, it started off a little weak initially, but eventually that it found its footing. It was one of the first time in the history of contemporary Guyana where all of the political parties at that time, leading civil society organizations, the private sector, and a number of professionals participated in the drafting of national development. And do you know what the forward to that strategy said? It said that Guyana was a racially divided society. And that what we are calling elections periodically is a fiercely competitive struggle between the two large regions. That was it. And there was consensus on that position. Everybody agreed to that. All the political parties, all the civil society organizations, all the professionals, right? Who sat and divided that out. Let me divert there. I think sometimes we have an illusion of believing that Guyana is a normal society. Guyana, to my mind, is not a normal society. It's not normal. And I'll tell you another thing. Guyana is one of the few societies where political campaign goes on every day. So while we have elections every 5 years, parties are campaigning every day. Every day. And very often in these campaigns, the activists of the respective parties, what they're actually doing is mobilizing within their own enclaves. And while they may not openly use race as persuasion, the bottommost thing on the other places. I mean, it is spoken there, right? It happens there. There's no question about that. Because the very demographics, these two large parties, separated only by about 10%. I think one vote for 9% based on the last census. The other vote for 9%. Maybe 10%, right? Right. The minorities, right? 10%. But because they are only separated by that 10%, that it is that creates this kind of temptation to mobilize along the racial path. Now, apart from what these political parties and the Presidential Commission and all these society said in the forward to the national development plan, we must not forget in 1997, there was this post-election crisis. political fallout, to kind of ethnic outlook. You know what happened? It was that post 1997 election discovery that led to the formation of Accord. You vote for the vice mayor and so on. And in that accord, I can recall there were three, at least, menu of measures. One was the audit, two, constitutional electoral reform, and the third was political dialogue. Right? The chairman of CARICOM at that time was the institution Prime Minister. Yes, can't recall at the moment. But he undertook to oversee this peace process. Unfortunately, he dropped it. Now, let me say this. Yes, there was a Constitutional Reform Commission and so on. They did the work and so on. The question is, did the reforms and the constitutional and electoral reforms went as far enough to address the problem envisaged or spoken so eloquently about in the forward in the national defense strategy and the 1997 post-election follow did it? I want to ask you the question. As race relations prior to 1997, has it improved or has it worsened? If it has worsened, then it means that the tinkering that was done at the place, the constitution and electoral reform, did not go as far as up. And it is within that context that I'm suggesting that what is required is the kind of constitutional and electoral reform that will ensure that all these laudable constitutional requirements are meaningful. Look, Article 13, and I want to join in commending Article 13, and also to commend the former president for agreeing to participate in this forum. I mean, given all the links that civil society has been getting recently from all quarters. All quarters. I don't know what people are afraid of about civil society, but the mere fact that civil society is singled out for chastisement means that obviously civil society has to be doing something better. Has to do something good. And therefore they need to be supported. Right? Let me close by saying this. Article 14 derives its name from Article 40 of the Constitution. What Article 13? The principal objective of the political system of the state is to establish an inclusion democracy. Every constitution speaks about liberty, democracy, equity. Right? What Article 13, which was an addition to what one says, it went beyond democracy, it went to the point of defining, right, what this democracy means and how far it should go, right? By providing increasing opportunities for the participation of citizens and their organizations in the management and decision-making process in the state, with particular emphasis on those areas of decision-making that directly affect the region. There is another illusion where we believe that we are operating, as I said earlier, in a normal setting, a normal state. And there's this illusion that all these institutions that we have within the state are operating professionally, independently, and impartially. You will know as much as I do that about the subversion of many of these institutions. You will know also about these institutions. Well, I mean, mention was made earlier about the fact that even though the Constitution, the amendments to the Constitution made provision for certain constitutional bodies, even past and present administrations have refused to constitute those commissions. And as was rightly said, what we need is the kind of constitutional engineering that will ensure that whatever is enshrined in these documents, that they are adhered to by those who swear to honor and uphold these documents. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Here we had it from the speaker, the main speaker of President Donald Ramotar, and the two commentators on the presentation. We have this facility booked until 6:30, so we have just about 21 minutes for questions, and I'll give absolute priority to the floor. So just for Guyana to that.
Questions and comments.
Please put up, please.
Questions and comments.
Yes, questions and comments.
Okay, let me start. I mean,
That's what we'll say, a member of the executive of the Working People's Alliance. Is that correct?
Yes, I am.
Thank you.
But I come here in my own personal.
Sure.
I listened to the former president, and I came particularly to listen to him, old comrade. And I must be very frank. You know, his presentation of the issue showed no evolution in thinking. In fact, it is retrogressive. And I'm disappointed because I really think as a person who actually was the head of the nation, must, in that experience, learn something that could be more progressive. He correctly pointed out the role of the imperialist powers, the colonial powers, in aggravating racial relations, external intervention. But he seems to be quiet on the same colonial powers who introduced colonialism, slavery, and indenture, and structured the economic and social relations that give rise to racism or racial insecurity. But for him, you know, what they did to the PPP is more important than that profound destruction which shapes our reality. You can't tell me the African community after over 200 odd years of slavery, where I got nothing, where I derive of collective wealth, and you put me in competition with other people, where you structure the economy for divide and rule. I am blaming the Indians or anybody, but I'm saying that is the work of the colonialists. It is those structural things apart from the manipulation of the external politics that is the basis of Guyanese racial insecurity. Tell me what effect PR or forced party reports have to Amerindians. Tell me what a political system, one man, one vote, will give any justice to the Amerindians. They don't have numbers to compete. The problem, I'm going to stop right now. The problem for us, we're thinking like white people. We're thinking like colonialists. We believe in domination. We don't believe that independence gives us a chance as victims of colonialism to understand our reality in our own way of thinking and to reconstruct what the white people have given us as democracy, political behavior, and so on. We don't think that independence means that we got to digest the experience and fashion something totally different. And this is how we pass down to the younger generation. I'm all in the fight. Listen to the young people. Always setting up them up for them to slaughter one another in the next very near future. That is how we do it today.
Thank you very much, Owen. The time is available to the floor. Did you want to make a comment on this question of the development of first-past votes and proportional representation?
Well, I haven't heard. First of all, let me congratulate all the speakers. You all of you, Don especially, did a hell of a lot of research. So all of you have managed your research to make a particular position. Has not been entirely objective, like you say. There's one point I want to make about what Donald had to say. The reason that we changed from a constituency system in this country to PR was to get rid of the PPP. Plain and simple. That's why it happened. Why? Because the PPP, by the nature of the geographical disposition of their supporters, were winning the election with a significant minority of the vote. I don't remember the exact figures, but you had a parliamentary majority with a minority of the popular vote. That's why it got changed, because the DNC and the UF could not win the election on the PR. Wasn't possible. That simple. There was nothing about it that had to do with the academic or the constitutional values, one way or the other. We got stuck with PR for that reason. I thought we were coming here to discuss not so much constitutional change, but the advantages and disadvantages of PR and first past the post system. Both have significant advantages. The disadvantage of the PR system is that parliamentarians are elected as part of a huge group and have no obligation to service any particular part of the country. And the first part of the post, a parliamentarian is elected from a particular geographical area and has to service it. So here you have ministers in parliament and parliamentarians that have no obligation to meet the requirements of any particular part of the country. They're just part of a long list. Then we have a PR system with an open list. A closed list would be better, in my opinion, because at least you know when somebody has to be replaced in Parliament, it's the next name on the list, and not the name on the bottom of the list if the leader so feels inclined. So we could change from and I think there would be some advantage to it, from an open list system to closed list system. You go back to first past the post, you're going to run into the same problem we had before. Gerrymandered constituencies. With the government in power fixing the constituencies by its majority vote in parliament to suit the vote. That's what happened with first past. At least PR avoids that. There's one ultimate objective of PR is superior to all the rest. It is the majority of the popular vote that rules. First past the post system, it is not necessarily the majority of the popular vote. Suits England, may not suit her, And as I think it was Mr. Witter pointed out, oh no, it's the most popular system in the world. It's beyond our first class vote. But you know what I haven't heard tonight from many of the speakers? Why do we need them? What's the problem? What's the big problem?
Well, the topic today is on electoral system.
Which is why I addressed it.
Yes, yes.
But by just since most of the speakers departed hugely from that and addressed constitutional issues. I asked a question which you won't answer it tonight, but since you're going to go on with these lectures, I think you need to focus on what is the biggest problem this country faces. Why do we need constitution?
Thanks, Skip. We will take
And
that one.
I have one more thing to
Save
say.
you next time. Yeah, absolutely. That's it.
Right. We need it because we're an ethnically divided country. That's why we need it. Think about that. And why are we? Because from the beginning of independence, the two major political parties have their power base based on ethnic loyalty. That has not changed in all the years since we've been independent. Those are the major problems, and I look for you guys who are now, I'm past tense pretty well.
Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
to address.
Yes, you, ma'am.
Excellency, esteemed panel, ladies and gentlemen. First an
Would you
observation,
identify yourself, please?
first an observation, if you will allow me. And it may seem as though I'm just speaking and running, but I do have a car waiting outside. So first my observation, that here we are talking about something as important as electoral systems and constitutional reform. And I look around you and I am saddened that we have so few young people.
Indeed.
It really bothers me that young Guyanese don't seem to grasp the importance of what we are discussing here today. And I hope there can be some method, some way of engaging more young people. You know, the University of Guyana, I'm saddened that they don't have a body here, you know, to engage in this discussion. Right? And I think that is really a bad reflection of where we are as a nation. You know, they would look around and use a local term, usual suspects.
Would you like to address the topic we dealt with this afternoon?
Yes, well, that is the second thing I want to talk about. We've had a very good explanation of the whole history of what we have today, you know, what obtains. My humble opinion is that regardless of how well the desk reviews place our constitution, as long as we have a system where at the end of every electoral cycle, there are groups of persons who feel left out, who feel that they do not share in the national pie, who feel as though they do not have recourse to justice, then in my humble opinion, the Constitution is not worth the paper it's printed on. And we as a nation, we as a people, have to find systems that work, that we can all be included, we can all feel as though we have a part to play and we share in this glowing pie that we hear about every day with all the wealth that's coming our way. I thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Excellency.
Thank you very much. Maybe as I will use my authority as chairman, I think there are a couple of points that I would like to have seen this afternoon, like that we now. I mean, we have a completely winner-take-all system. We have 51%, means 100%. We have exclusion of independence by that evil section 11B of the Representation of the People's Act that says you must compete in 6 out of the 10 regions representing 13 of the geographical seats. The other point is, we do have a mix here, I guess you could say, because we do have a modified system. The problem is, in my view, that our political parties have so dominated the space. They created that evil 11B. They ignore the campaign financing rules in the Representation of the People Act with absolute impunity. Ask any political leader here whether their party has ever complied with the law. And the answer will be no. The answer will be no. No, I'll let you finish, sir. I'll let you finish. So I am, well, it would be nice if you make it public because it ought to be public. So there are, and I really welcome what the previous speaker said. We do have that situation where our young people, and I know we've said, oh, we're going to get everybody on the young people. Look, I teach at the University of Guyana. I beg my own students. They're just not interested. They want to play with telephones most of the time. They're the future. Yes, Mr.
I'm Jonathan Yearwood, and I would like to ask a question to anyone of why we need electoral reform. Why is it someone like myself or any one individual cannot run for president of Guyana? Why is it that we must belong to a political party before we are allowed to run for president of Guyana? Why is it that we cannot be eligible to partake in elections as an individual, which is my right as a Guyanese to want to aspire to become president of my lovely nation? But in order to do that, I must first of all join a political party. Thank you.
Does anyone at the table wish to give a brief response to that question?
I think we work with the system. We have a system that will appeal and explain the whole how these systems were developed. So I don't think now that we've worked out with a complete full participation of the people and they have system into it that you know should be this question. But apart from that, even in all the systems that we had, we had things like people had to make a deposit before they contested an election. Why? Because they didn't want people to frivolously come around and do all of that thing. So they put something right up to the 61 election, we were talking about people losing their deposit, right? And one of the things that I know was discussed to prevent some of these things, because I'm just making a term what some words were used, like some crackpot people rather than everybody wants to jump on the background. We were saying that you had to have a certain amount of votes before you could get into seats and that type of thing. And so it is. I think you have to work with a rational system. This is one of the problems I have with people who telling me that you're driving people to go to elections. People put themselves up to the public to go to elections, campaign to elections, but then you are telling me after the election is over that the bill must pass it over to the user.
All right. Can I have some response? This is the final question. Please make it brief, sir. We have just no, please. I have to ask.
Yeah, make it very. I must congratulate Article 13 for this initiative. I think it's very important and appropriate at this time. I would also like to congratulate and duly respect ex-President Donald Ramotar, Mr. Ram, Dr. Thomas, and Mr. Witter on making this forum very much conducive at this point about development. My question is that we are all aware that the politicians have perpetuated the system that is polarized the country racially. Okay? Based on that presumption, I would ask, what are we doing, or what are some of the common grounds in order to negate that polarization? We talk about constitutional reform. Of course, the Constitution being the supreme law of the land. But inherent in the Constitution, we have the guardrails of democracy. We have all these various commissions, the human rights commissions, the procurement commissions, the police commissions, the public service, the judicial commissions. But yet, we cannot come to the point where we can meaningfully and effectively establish the very basis or the very essence of what the framers of the Constitution had intended this to be. So that is a problem that I see that we need to address. Now, in short, what are the common grounds? Is it the economic basis that may have perpetuated this type of divisiveness within our nation? I'm just assuming. I know President Ramotar alluded to the fact that there's no economic basis or economic that would perpetuate this. But in the absence of any index or economic index as regards to what is being afforded to one race as against the other, how can we meaningfully address these issues? So we must incorporate civil society as well as the University of Guyana and other intellectual perspective in ascertaining a real perspective as to going forward. Thank you.
I think that's a very good topic that we should discuss at the wider forum. But I'll give Desmond 1 minute.
Yeah, just quickly, kind of responding to Ms. Fear was, well, if we look at what's wrong with this system, we have PR, well, it has to be mentioned, we have proportional representation with plurality, which is not nowhere else in the world. You either have a plural system or you have a PR system. We have them mixed up because a party, to win the elections, all you have to do is have the most seats. There's no question of having a majority of seats. So we have a strange system. We have a PR with plurality. We have this thing where parties cannot form a coalition after the elections to form a government. We have this thing where the parties can recall a member, can have a member of parliament expelled from parliament. Without, of course, that can happen in other systems, but when you get expelled, you go with your constituency, not here. So we have some really strange things going on. This system needs fixing for all kinds of reasons. Because as I say, I've touched on a lot of these things. We would spend all day here if we were to look at all that's wrong with this system. Now, the one thing quickly on Mr. Yearwood, the question that you raised is, these are things we have to settle. The idea of the 6 seats that are having to participate in 6 seats, there could be reasons for this. It could be that the government, the idea is that you don't want a president who is from a specific location. You want that whoever is the president has some level of national acceptance of cause. And you have these rules apply in other countries. In some countries, in Nigeria, for example, you cannot be president if you didn't get so many You can have the most seats, but you have to have a certain amount of distribution. I'm just saying that this may not necessarily be what we want, but there are reasons for it, and we have to discuss the reasons and decide what we want. And that's why I say we have to have that conversation.
Thank you very much, sir. We will close now, please. Is that no, man? No, but we have a
We will kick out of the room. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to call Nancy to say a word of thanks. And even as it's coming up here, Jonathan, thank you, and everybody, thank you for your questions. It's been very interesting. There is more, and I know that there are more questions we have in mind. This is why this is supposed to be a series. It's not the end of it, right? So we're gonna have more, and of course, the perpetuation of power continues to occupy our attention.
Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. And I am here to do a quick task, which is to thank each and every one of you for coming out, especially the head table, the organizers, each and every member of Article 13 that have caused this possible. You, the guests, the invitees, and persons of interest that thought it necessary to attend this special electoral reform and electoral system. Remember, it's the inaugural program, so you will be updated as the others come forward and as we meet with you either through social media or in this kind of forum. So we thank you all once again and we wish you a safe ride home.
Thank you, Nadia. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you. And remember, Article 13 next exercise is our every Monday picketing demanding for the change in the outside tax. So join us.
I know.
Because one of the problems